Hey YouTube, Spider004 here. This is going to be a tutorial on how to get your ACF vehicles running correctly and as fast as they can go. It's not going to be a tutorial on how to make an E2 to set your gear or anything like that. I'm just specifically going to show you how to do the settings for ACF components. Here I have my Formula 1 chassis, that's what I call it, and I have a 3.6 liter V6 petrol. It has 166 foot-pounds of torque, but we are using fuel, so you can see it has 208 foot-pounds of torque. Why am I mentioning this? Well, one of the first things you could do wrong is have too small of a transmission for the engine that you have. You generally want about 100 foot-pounds of torque gap in between the transmission and the engine. So like my engine has 208 foot-pounds of torque that it can output. This transmission can take 321 foot-pounds of torque. If my engine output 250 and this could take 321, I would go up to the next transmission most likely. Why? Because if your engine is too powerful for the transmission, it will just slip. If it's just a little bit too powerful, then it won't slip that much. Your car will still go, but it'll sit there revving at the maximum RPMs for the engine, and it'll sound like ass, and it won't go as fast as it could. So the first thing we need to do is we need to link these together. So I right-click the engine, right-click the transmission, right-click the transmission to the differential, differential to the wheels, differential, transmission to the differential, and differential to the wheels. Something important to note, just as a note, if your car is just sitting there spinning its wheels, you might want to look into make spherical. It basically just makes your wheel into a sphere. All models in all games and anything ever are made of flat surfaces. You can see this flat surface here. If the flat surface is too big, your car wheels, when they spin, they'll actually bounce off of these points here. And make spherical basically makes a sphere that has very, very small flat surfaces, so that helps that a lot. Another thing is your physical properties tool. You should always get it out and do phys prop underscore material space jalopy tire. That's JALOPYTIRE, all one word, and then you hit your wheels with it. That'll make your wheels super sticky. Alright, back to ACF. Now, we have our things linked, and I need to wire these up. Got active to the pod controller, active from the fuel, pod controller, active, throttle to throttle, gear. You need to find some way to make your transmission change gear, whether you're wiring up gear down or you actually have a chip for it. We're not going to worry about clutching and braking, because that's another thing for another day. So I also forgot to link the fuel, so if you haven't done that, you should do that. Right click the engine, right click the fuel. Alright, so all of this is the base settings. My engine is, of course, the base settings, because you can't change that, but my transmission is the base transmission, and my differentials are the base differentials. Now I have a certain thing that I do with the differentials. I actually don't have them have a ratio at all. I just use them as a differential. So what I do is I just set these to 1. It makes it a lot simpler for your transmission settings. And I always use gear 1 as reverse on the transmission. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm gonna set up a baseline on my transmission. I never use the default one. Alright. Now something important to note for the transmission is your values are going to vary. based on the engine RPM. Like, this engine has a red line of 5,000. If the engine had a red line of, I don't know, 7,500, you could use the same transmission settings and they would probably work fine, but you would want to change your final drive. And I'll explain more on that later. Generally, I start my final drive at 0.5, and then I start my reverse at negative 0.1. And I start my forward at 0.1. It's really handy to hover your mouse over the gear word and then just click and drag. It's a lot more precise than clicking on the over here. Now what I'm doing is I'm just setting up a 0.1 increase per gear. So 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. This car will have one forward gear and one reverse gear and 5 forward. Alright, so that's the baseline done. Now we can see it doesn't have very much gusto. I'm going to get out my debugger just so I can tell what gear I'm in. Actually, don't I have a... Yeah, I do. I have a screen for that. Alright. Now we can see the acceleration is kind of lacking there. So what we want to do is we want to go to our ACF menu and we want to decrease these two. So it's at 0.1 right now. I'm going to decrease reverse and forward to 0.7. I'm going to see how that goes for first gear. Still a little lackluster. So I'm gonna go ahead and decrease it even more. Now, if you're using a different engine, you can use the same settings that I'm using. You just want to use a different final drive based on what the RPM max. If the engine you're using has a lower RPM, your final drive ratio is going to be higher. If your engine has a higher RPM, your final drive ratio is going to be lower. So we have 0.5 for our first gear, and I'm going to try 0.15 for our second, and 0.25 for our third. See how that goes. Still a little lackluster. So 0.5 for our first, and I'll just go down to 0.1 for our second, and something like 0.17 for our third. Now that's too short of a gear. Takes too little time to accelerate for a second gear. So I'm going to increase that to about 0.12. Seems about right. And let's get 5th and 6th gear going. You generally want your gear ratios to decrease as you go along. Like this increases by 0.7, then it increases by 0.5. So the next one I'm going to have it increase by, I think 0.4. So my 5th gear on the transmission, which is actually my 4th forward gear, it's going to be 0.21, and then I'll try 0.25 for the last one. The main thing about the transmissions is you just gotta play with it. Now it's important to note that you can make a small engine make something go fast, but you'll need a long run at it. Or you can make a big engine make something accelerate really fast, like a dragster, if you use a shorter final gear. And some people prefer different gear ratios. I always prefer gear ratios that decrease as you go along. So it's a longer to shorter gear. That's how they do it in real life. That's how I like it. I kind of nailed it on the head here when making this. Anyway, let's go through some problems that you might be having. Why your thing might not be working. If I went through that simple little thing and you did it and your thing still isn't working, these things right here, the differentials, it's important to note where the nub is. Like, the nub denotes the top of the thing. It might denote the bottom. I just consider it the top. My rearward ones, let me fading towards this for you here. My rearward ones, I always have the nub up with a final drive of 1. And then I have a final drive of 1 on the front one, but I have the nub down. If you have the nub up on both your front and your back, you might need to have the front one be like -1 instead of 1. Or you could just reverse it so the nub is down. If you have the nub up on both sides, this wheel will try and go backwards, and this wheel will try and go forwards, and you won't go anywhere. Like I said before, if you're using a transmission that is too small for the engine, you're probably not going to go anywhere. And if your gear ratios are too high, like if you're doing final drive 1 and gear 1 for your first gear, you're not going to go anywhere. Because it's important to realize that if you have a final drive of 1 and on the same transmission, those gears are twice as large as what we have now. Generally, 0.5 is a really good place to start for your final drive. And then make a transmission. And then you can keep that transmission, keep it at 0.5 and make it for a medium RPM transmission like I did here. And then you can keep that transmission. If you like the settings, just keep it and use it for everything, but just adjust the final drive. That's what I do. I have 8-speed, a 4-speed, and a 6-speed that I keep. If you want a transfer case, what you would do is you would put this transmission as a straight transmission, and then you would have a transfer case here. And generally for transfer cases, I recommend 0.5 for the first gear and 1 for the second gear. It makes it simple. You cut the ratio in half, and it makes it nice for off-roading. I've also tried 0.75 and 1. It's generally a good thing to use fuel because you get more power. And with engines, generally horsepower is a rating of how fast you can go. Torque is a rating of how quickly you can get there. So if you have an engine that has massive amounts of horsepower, but not much torque, and you're accelerating something that's heavy very slowly, then you might want to invest in an engine that has more torque. Or likewise, if you have something that accelerates very fast and you don't go very fast, you might want to invest in something with more horsepower. But generally, those two things can be adjusted with a correctly geared transmission. That's about all I have on this subject, really. Spoilers are always good. Splitters and spoilers are always a good thing to use so you can get more traction. I have these two things here actually fin tooled. On a rear-wheel drive car, the back end will want to slide out a lot. And if you have a fin on the back, like this is like, I don't know what it weighs. It weighs 25, but it's 500% fin. Anytime the back will want to wobble out either way, it'll actually stop it from doing that. It offers a sideways resistance. You should always try and use a central prop for your vehicles too. If they're very wobbly, try and move to a central prop. Like everything is connected to this one prop besides the suspension. Everything's welded to this, everything's constrained to this. Yeah. If you still have problems, leave a comment in the comments section. I hope I've explained it, and I hope your cars actually get moving.